Attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, this is Wayne Callan for Attitude Magazine. Today's webinar, Using Music to Rewire Your ADHD LD Child's Brain, will give us insights and practical strategies to help our children focus, concentrate, and learn at school and at home. The more we know about music's beneficial effect on the developing ADHD brain, the more we can tune into it to help our kids. We are very fortunate to have Sharlene Habermeyer, the author of Good Music, Brighter Children. The research for her book came from the work she did with her learning disabled son, Brandon. Sharlene holds a master's degree from Pepperdine University and currently teaches college. Sharlene will give an introduction to music in the ADHD brain. Then she will take your questions. If you want to ask a question, type it in the Ask the Question box. So, welcome Sharlene, and very good to have you here today.
Thank you, Wayne, for your introduction, and hello everyone. I'm happy to be here today for this webinar about sound therapy and sound medicine for your using music and music lessons to sharpen your ADHD and ADD and LD child's brain. I spent over the last 30-plus years studying how music affects the brain and how it builds a bigger, better brain. I'm a mother of 5 boys, and my initial inspiration to study the brain benefits of music came about the same time my 3rd son, Brandon, was born. Brandon suffered a very traumatic birth. My doctor was going out of town, and so he induced my labor. Brandon was too high in the birth canal, and the doctor literally dragged him out with forceps. It caused a lot of damage. I'm not going to go into all the details, but by the age of 3, we did have him in speech and language therapy. At the age of 6, when he was about midway through kindergarten, we decided to have him tested. So we had him tested both through the public schools and privately. The results that came back were grim. He had auditory processing, auditory discrimination, visual motor, visual perception. There were sensory integration issues and attention deficit disorder. The difference between his oral and written IQ is approximately 38 points, which indicates severe learning disabilities. And so we were pretty much told that school would be difficult and college more than likely would be out of the question. There was one of the psychologists that told us some very good advice and encouraged us to find out something that he was interested in and good at and help him to develop that. Next slide. Those of you, and I'm sure most of you, who have an ADD, ADHD child and a learning disabled child, you totally and completely understand the difficulties. When they're in school, they have difficulty staying on task, focusing, listening, understanding, and so forth. We were told that the learning disabled child, that it all learning disabilities start as auditory processing. They can hear fine, but they have difficulty processing what they hear, and as a result, they have problems in all different areas of learning. Next slide. I had studied quite a bit about how music affects the brain, so I really felt that music was going to be Brandon's catalyst for learning. If you look at the image on the right-hand side, you see all of the different areas that music strengthens in the brain. It's basically the entire brain, the left, the right, the front, the back portions of the brain. But it particularly builds the auditory, the visual spatial, and the motor areas of the brain. Next slide. So here is your brain onto music. Let's talk about the auditory for a minute. The auditory cortex is directly related to speech and language. When a child has a well-developed auditory cortex, they're oftentimes early talkers and early readers. Now, when a child learns to read, as you know, it's ears first, eyes second. They have to be able to hear the sounds of the letters, the vowels, the consonants, the blends, in order to know how to say the words. So auditory cortex is extremely important for reading and learning. The next area is the visual, because they have to be able to visually track with their eyes from word to word as each word comes, and then also from line to line, because you don't want them skipping words or skipping lines. The visual spatial areas of the brain, this helps children with reading comprehension because they are forming pictures in their mind. You don't want them just reading words on their page. When they form the pictures in their mind, it helps them to remember what they read. It also is directly related to higher forms of math and science as they are forming 3-dimensional pictures in their mind. The motor cortices of the brain is extremely important because that is brain organization. It is also makes the foundation to help build the visual and auditory system. So you can see that they are all connected. And therefore, the motor cortices becomes the building blocks of the brain. So the question is what happens when a child listens to classical music and what happens when they actually learn a musical instrument? Next slide. We're going to talk about what happens when they listen to classical music. And the question that always comes up is why classical music? Why does classical music build a bigger, better brain? Why can't my child listen to pop or some other kind of music or jazz? Or why is it classical music? So I'm going to explain this to you architecturally. I want you to pretend that you're standing outside your home or apartment building or condominium, wherever you live. And I want you to look at the shapes that make up your building or home. You're going to see some rectangles, maybe some triangles, some squares, some domes or half domes, a circle. Now, in terms of that mathematical architectural structure, you can compare that to any genre of music except for classical music. Why? Because it's a fairly straightforward and simple architectural structure. However, in order to understand what classical music looks like architecturally, you need to look at the old European Gothic cathedrals. Next slide. Okay, as you can see, there's a huge difference between our homes and these cathedrals. If you were standing in front of one of these cathedrals and just looking at 1 square foot, you're going to see patterns upon patterns, detail upon detail, intricacy and complexity. All right, so the mathematical structure of these cathedrals best represent what classical music would look like architecturally. In fact, the music of Mozart has been compared to the elemental structure of these buildings. So if you take these buildings, you turn it into music, it would be classical music. You put this on the brain, no wonder it builds left, right, front, back portions of the brain simultaneously. So let's talk about some of the studies. Next slide. This first study was done at the Eastman School of Music by Dr. Donald Shetler, and what he was studying was speech and language ability. He wanted to see if babies exposed in utero for 10 minutes of sedative, calm, classical music and 10 minutes of stimulating classical music each day, if they would have more advanced speech and language skills. So what the mothers did is they put headphones on their stomach each day for approximately 9 months. And by the way, you can get the same result and you don't have to use the headphones. So what Shetler did is he was observing the children in comparison to their counterparts who did not have the same exposure during utero. Next slide. They were looking at different ages and stages, and they noticed the greatest difference between the ages of 2 and 5. Those children who were exposed to classical music, just listening to classical music 20 minutes a day, between the ages of 2 and 5, their speech and language, they had stronger memory skill. They had more developed speech patterns. They had greater clarity, articulation, sophistication, and organization of the brain. Now, I can attest to this because all of my children, except for Brandon, I played music for them in utero. They were all early talkers, early readers. Now, in my book, I go into more detail on this, and they've actually done studies to state that a 5-week-old fetus can hear sounds outside of the mother's womb. Next slide. Another study that was done by Dr. Georgi Lazanov, a psychiatrist and educator. Now, he spent his entire career studying how certain pieces of classical music from the Baroque, classical, and Romantic periods changed the electromagnetic frequencies of the brain to approximately 7.5 cycles per second. Now, this is also referred to as the alpha mode. We're talking brain waves here. It's also referred to as the Schumann resonance or meditative thought in the brain. It's basically at this frequency when the body's relaxed, but the mind remains active and alert, and the person is able to focus and concentrate at peak performance. It's also sometimes when you get your very best ideas. So you're able to absorb, retain, and retrieve information better. Now, that's working memory. It's one thing to learn information, but you have to be able to retain it and also retrieve it. That's working memory. Now, some of the examples of music that he studied was George Friedrich Handel, the water music. It's just simply called the water music. That was one of our family's favorites. Bach, also the Brandenburg Concertos, Vivaldi's The Four Seasons, Mozart, A Little Night Music. Now, those of you who are familiar with that music know that this is not calm or sedative music. It's very bright and very lively type of music. Next slide. So this is how we used it in our family. And by the way, on these pictures that you see, the people have headphones on. I never used headphones. We just listened to it. So I would go and pick up my kids from school. The music was playing in the background when they got into the car. We talked. It was background music. When they got into the house, we did have an intercom system. So they were listening to the music as they changed their clothes, got a snack, ran around. It usually takes between 15 and 20 minutes for the brain to change to this mode. I usually had it going for a half an hour to 45. You don't have to wait that long. But then I gathered everyone around the kitchen table to do homework. Now, it was pretty amazing, and it did help all of my sons, but particularly Brandon. Next slide. This is something that you can do. I'm sure that most of you have read at least one self-help book, so you know that they pretty much follow the same protocol. You have an action, then you have a result, you have a change, then you have a double change and a transformation. So let's just talk about learning a simple spelling test. And for the ADHD child, nothing is simple. A spelling test is not simple. So they come home on Monday with this test. You have them listening to this music while they're studying. The result is they are able to concentrate, focus better, and stay on task. The change is they are able to learn the spelling words easier and quicker so that on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, when you go over the words again, they are able to recall them from memory. The double change is when they go on Friday, they do better on the test, probably get 100%, if not maybe miss one or two. The transformation that you want to take place is that their attitude changes towards school. It becomes better, and eventually you want their attitude to change towards learning. What I did is I kept a journal on Brandon's successes, on the test that he took, the date that he took, on whether it was a spelling test or a math facts test or whatever it was, and the score that he got. Now, this was so that I knew that he would come back and there would be a problem with some of his tests, but I wanted him to see his successes. All of these small incremental changes can lead to big success, and the big success that I was after is I wanted him to love learning. That was my goal. I wanted him to love learning. Next slide. All right. So let's talk about, this was something that we did, and mornings can be difficult. And when Brandon would get up, he was just all over the map. And playing 15 to 20 minutes of the classical music, I mean, half the morning was gone by then. So I needed to come up with something that would help him focus right away. So what I did is I was studying about crawling. When babies crawl, I'm sure all your pediatricians have told you the importance of a baby crawling for brain organization. So I thought, okay, obviously Brandon's not crawling, but what kind of an activity can we do that's similar to crawling that would get him focusing ASAP in the morning? So I thought, okay, let's try marching. The arms are swinging back and forth. The legs are up in the air. Let's see if that will help. Now, you know that an ADHD child, you can only give them usually one task at a time. I had a poster on his door. This is what we do in the morning. It helped sometimes, but most of the time it didn't. So I talked to my husband. I said, let's turn this into a game. I talked to my two older boys. I said, look, we're going to do this as a game to help Brandon. So then we sat down as an entire family, and I said, the marching music, and we use the marches of John Philip Sousa. This music's going to go on in the morning. Let's march from task to task to task to task and see how much fun we can have. Let's see if we can stay on track. It was nothing short of a miracle. Brandon was able to go from task to task to task without me hovering over him. And we got to school on time all the time. His brain was working on all four cylinders. Now, I've told principals about this, like when children are out on the playground, when they come in and they need to get in lines to go into the classroom, I tell the principals, turn on marching music over the intercom system so that they march into lines, march into the classroom. To teachers, I've said, you know, in the afternoon, after they've had lunch, all the blood has gone to their stomach to digest the food, they're tired, they're sluggish, have them get up and march around the peripheral of the classroom to get them working on all four cylinders. It is pretty amazing what can happen. Next slide. These next two slides are actually on sound therapies. You would have to actually go to these places and have them help you with these. This is the Tomatis method. It was developed by Dr. Alfred Tomatis. He's an ear, nose, and throat doctor from France. What he was doing is he was using acoustically filtered classical music, mainly the music of Mozart and Gregorian chants. He says that he's retraining the muscles in the ear, particularly the inner ear. I like to look at it more like exercising those muscles. Okay, particularly the vestibular and vestibular and the cochlea, which is in the inner ear, and those are responsible for balance, equilibrium, and coordination. Very important. That whole system also helps with the other areas of the brain. So the child, they have earphones on, and they're actually listening to this music. And it does help children with learning disabilities, reading, dyslexia, auditory processing, even autism. They also use what is called electronic gating, where the music shifts from low to high frequencies. Next slide. Dr. Ronald Minson, a psychiatrist in Colorado, he had a daughter who was severely dyslexic and depressed. He went to France and he studied under Dr. Tomatis. And he put his daughter through the program, and she had amazing results. And he came back to the United States. He made some adjustments. He still uses the acoustically filtered classical music of Mozart and Gregorian chants. He called his integrated listening systems because he added two very important components, movement and visual stimulation. So not only are they listening to this music, but they're also doing movement and the visual. So you have a whole network of sensory systems that are being exercised, the visual, the auditory, the motor, the vestibular, and emotional. Believe it or not, it does affect the emotional. Now, I called one of their therapists, Aline Vianetta, and I interviewed her for my book. She gave me a lot of different examples from the students that she works with. Now, about a month ago, I purchased the program from her. I flew to Utah, sat down because I have a granddaughter who's going deaf and blind. They've stabilized her sight. However, she does wear hearing aids. However, that has also, the hearing aspect has affected different aspects of her learning. So you can stay tuned. I will be blogging about her success with this program. But Aline Vianetta, she has integrated learning strategies. She was absolutely amazing in the time and the effort that she took with me to go through every step-by-step of this program. Next slide. Next, I want to talk about what happens when we actually learn a musical instrument, when your child learns a musical instrument. This is a study that was done by Dr. Gordon Shaw and Francis Rauscher at the University of California at Irvine and University of Wisconsin at Oshkosh. What they were studying was spatial intelligence. They called it spatial temporal reasoning. The temporal part is when you're learning to read music. You look at the note, but you're constantly looking ahead to the next note that you're going to be playing. That's the temporal issue. They call it reasoning rather than intelligence, but basically spatial intelligence is being able to form pictures in your mind. And as I said earlier, that is directly related to reading comprehension and higher forms of math and science. So they went into a preschool of 3-year-olds. They gave them 2 keyboard lessons a week that lasted between 15 and 20 minutes. These kids were not practicing during the week. They showed an increase of spatial temporal reasoning 46% in 8 months. Then they went to 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds and 7-year-olds because the greatest growth of the cortex of the brain is between the ages of 3 and 7. They showed up to 125% increase in spatial intelligence. I actually went and visited Dr. Shaw several times when he was alive. He died in 2005. Next slide. Okay, here are some examples, and there are many, of various studies that have been done to show that when a child who has learning disabilities, who has the attention deficit issues, when they play a musical instrument, here are the things that were noted that improved: attention, concentration, impulse control, motivation, memory, reading comprehension, vocabulary, also rhythm. There's melody, harmony, and rhythm in music, the most powerful being rhythm. Anytime you set something to rhythm, you are going to remember it. Think about when you were 2 or 3 and you learned the ADC song. When you are 95, you are still going to be able to recite that song from memory because of the rhythm and that the ADC song was set to music. Again, do not forget, when a child learns a musical instrument, They are using left, right, front, back portions of the brain at the same time. A very powerful exercise. Next slide. The most recent study was conducted at the University of Vermont College of Medicine. They found that when children learn a musical instrument, there is increase in cortical thickness. They found that there was an increase in executive functioning. Now, part of executive functioning is when your child goes to school and the teacher gives them a direction, and they are able to follow that direction. When they are at home and you give them a direction and they are able to follow that direction, part of that is referred to as executive functioning. So that helped. Also working memory, which I already spoke about, being able to actually retrieve and remember things and facts that they learn. Attention control, organizational skill, anxiety management, emotional control. Think about these in terms of your child. All of these could be extraordinarily powerful. The researchers concluded that musical training, learning a musical instrument, could serve as a powerful treatment of cognitive disorders like ADD, ADHD children. Next slide. Okay, so here's the suggestion. In my book, I start and give suggestions all the way from utero through high school. But here's the suggestion. Number one, I would definitely, if you are expecting, I would definitely play classical music while the baby is in utero. Once they are 18 months, there are programs that you can get your child involved in. Look in your area. I just had a woman who emailed me about a program called Music Together in Oakland, California. There's all different programs. The international programs are Kinder Music, and another one's called Let's Play Music. Let's Play Music uses the music philosophies of Orff, Dalcross, and Kodály. Let me say a couple of things about Kodály. Kodály was developed by the Hungarian composer and musician Zoltán Kodály. Basically, it teaches a child to pick up any piece of music and to sing it on perfect pitch without the aid of an accompaniment. Now, if you think about that in terms of auditory cortex, what they are strengthening here, it's amazing. And how that would translate into not only speech and language and reading, but also learning languages later on, foreign languages later on. So this is an amazing, amazing program. They also use hand movements that were developed by Paul Kerwin. So next slide. These programs usually last until the child is about 6 or 7. Then think about getting them involved in private music lessons. My book talks about how to choose an instrument, a teacher, and how to get them to practice. And by the way, don't let them quit. There in Chapter 8, it talks about good instruments for the LD child, the ADD child, the ADHD child. The string instruments, if you're going with a string instrument, you want it the large string bass because they can stand up and they can put their whole arms around that instrument. It's big. The woodwinds, particularly the saxophone, because they can also stand while they're playing that instrument as well. The percussion, the reason that I have a star by that is that the piano is considered a percussion instrument because you strike the keys. The piano is always a good instrument to start with because when they strike middle C, they hear middle C. When you're playing a woodwind or particularly a string instrument, you have to be able to find that, and so you have to be able to hear that. So your auditory cortex has to be developed. Next slide. Dr. Frank Wilson said this: learning to play an instrument refines the development of the brain and the entire neurological system. It also connects and develops the motor systems of the brain in a way that cannot be done by any other activity. They did studies at UCLA. They put electrodes on the brain, and then they measured it when the child was playing a musical instrument, and it was as though the brain was on fire. Then they wanted to see, okay, is it just music, or what about other arts? What about drawing or painting or dancing or theater or drama? Will they also develop the brain in the same way as music? Well, the answer was no. There is something magical about learning that musical instrument. Next slide. So where is Brandon today? Well, despite what everyone said, Brandon did graduate from a 4-year university with a double major in film and philosophy with straight A's, and philosophy is not an easy major. He currently works in the film industry. He writes a blog on philosophical subjects that I do not understand, and yes, he continues to listen to classical music on his train commute to work every day. He and his wife live in a small apartment, so that no, they do not have a piano, but his brother lives about 30 minutes away. So 2 or 3 times a week he goes and visits his brother and plays the piano. He does understand the importance of music for his brain. Next slide. If you go on my website and you access through my Pinterest page, you will see over 75 different blogs on various subjects of music. There's my email. There's my book. It's available on Amazon. And now let's turn it over to questions.
Thanks, Sharlene. That really was a wonderful presentation. Loads of questions. I'll start with a pretty basic one. Any suggestions for how to get a 10-year-old to listen to classical music?
It'd be interesting to know what kind of music that they've listened to prior to this time. We pretty much had a rule. My sons did like to listen to other kinds of music, and certainly when they became teenagers, they wanted to listen to other kinds of music. But we had a rule that when they were studying, when they were preparing for exams, when they were doing any kind of homework, they listened to classical music. And of course, they were taking music lessons. They didn't play just classical music. So I would just have a rule in the house saying, okay, you can certainly listen to all of the kinds of music that you want to listen to, but when we're studying, when we're doing homework, we're listening to classical music.
Well, here's a follow-up question about that. Actually, one parent asked, is music with words okay to listen to while studying, or does the music have to be without lyrics, and does it have to be classical? Maybe you could explain.
Yes, it does. If you're going to build a bigger, better brain, if you want the brain to go into that mode, of the alpha mode, yes, it absolutely has to be classical music. And no, I would not have lyrics. I would strictly do those 4 suggestions that I gave, the Handel's Water Music, and you can download these. They're very inexpensive onto an MP3 player and play this music for your children. The Bach Brandenburg Concertos, there's Mozart's A Little Night Music, the Vivaldi, the Four Seasons, all of those, it's strictly classical music. Lozanoff studied a great deal of different pieces from the Baroque, classical, and Romantic periods. However, not all of those pieces of music put the brain into that alpha mode of being able to concentrate and focus better. So I would stick, when they're studying and when and you want concentration and focusing, I would definitely stick with the music that he suggests.
A teacher asked, how can I incorporate, she's teaching 9-year-olds, and she says, how can I incorporate music into my lesson plan every day? Do you have any suggestions about that?
Oh, that's a huge question. All right, I teach college, and what I do, because when my students walk into the classroom, I have classical music playing. One of the reasons is to kind of reset their brain from all the tech devices that they've been on. And so the music is playing. They all have to take a quiz the first 10 minutes of class, but the music continues to play. Now, while they are at their desks studying or reading or whatever, you can have the classical music that I just suggested playing in the background softly. For some kids, any kind of distraction is a distraction, so they are going to have to get kind of used to it. So you want to play it quietly at first. Now, in terms of using music for other things in the lessons, I would definitely, there's all different kinds of suggestions in my resource section. In fact, I've broken it down by subject matters and books and music and all different things that you can use to incorporate. But if they're learning math facts, I would take just about any genre of music. You can even take rap music. Obviously, you don't want to use the lyrics, but you want to use the rhythm of the rap to help them to learn those different math facts, whether it's addition, subtraction, or multiplication, to learn that anything that's in a sing-songy rhythm, even if they're learning science facts or anything that you set to music, they are going to learn quicker and easier and better. That's a pretty large question. If she wants to email me, I can give her more specifics.
Okay. Kim asks, well, it's more wishful thinking. She said, I hope this webinar addresses music in conjunction with dancing and movement and how powerful that can be. Do you want to
dancing is incredibly important. Dancing, movement is an essential part of learning, and absolutely, I think movement. And a lot, the Let's Play Music program uses Dalcross, and I talk about Dalcross. Dalcross was started by a Swiss, Emil Dalcross, and it uses movement, and specific movement. They use eurythmics. So, and they use classical music in the background. So it is amazing. Dance is amazing. And yes, because you're using the music in the background, they're listening to the music in the background. Very powerful.
Jake asks, are there any good apps, musical apps or software on the market that a child can use to reap the benefits of music? Do apps work as well as actually taking music lessons?
No.
Mm-hmm.
They actually have to get out that three-dimensional instrument, and they have to be playing that three-dimensional instrument with the music in front of them. Now, I will tell you, if it is an LD child and they have difficulty, Brandon had difficulty with spatial. I mean, he couldn't remember middle C from one day to the next. I had to color code the keyboard one octave up, one octave down. The other problem that he had is the music sitting on the piano. He couldn't look up there on the piano and then look at the keys. He had, at the beginning, he had to look at both. So I literally put the music on top of the keys in the beginning, and we color-coded the music, color-coded the keys for him. They need to have that three-dimensional experience. We live in a three-dimensional world. A lot of the problems that the LD and the ADD child have is that two-dimensional thing, computer that is going, that jumps from, it goes very fast, and so it actually causes more issues with a short attention span. It fosters that. What you're trying to do is foster a longer attention span. I wouldn't use the computer apps. I would have them actually learning the old-fashioned way.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sorry because I don't know of an app.
Oh, okay. What about the benefits of group lessons versus private lessons? Are there different benefits from each, or is it still centering around?
In the beginning, I think group lessons are fabulous. Both Kinder Music and Let's Play Music start about the age of 18 months. But eventually, yes, you want to get them into private lessons around 7 years old, 6 or 7 years old, when those programs usually graduate them, so to speak. Now, private lessons, I think, are excellent. Eventually, though, you could start them out with the piano, but I would get them into an instrument where when they get to middle school and high school, that they can play with the band or the orchestra, and hopefully that they have those available. Because when they're playing together with other kids, it keeps them motivated to keep practicing and to learn their parts and all of that. So there is a motivation when they're playing with others. So in the beginning, the group experience, I think, is great. And then as they get older, I think the private lesson experience is very powerful to hone their skill. And then when they get onto school, I think, again, the group experience helps them to stay with the music.
Another parent asks, his child is very shy, has problems with social skills. Is there any research on music and improved social skills in kids?
Yes, there actually is. Brandon was the same way. Even though he had these issues, he actually he became more introverted, particularly as the teasing started, and it really did help him. Particularly when you're doing it with a group. So if I don't know how old the child is that we're talking about, but if they start out with these group lessons, this definitely helps their social skills because they're sharing. And then if you get them involved, I started an orchestra. And in the beginning, we accepted just about everybody. We had kids that started playing in the orchestra as young as 7. And it was an incredibly amazing experience for these younger kids because, again, it was a group experience.
Yes.
So, yes, I think anytime you are, even particularly with a shy child, you are setting up experiences where they're in a group setting helps. And the other thing I would do is I would look into different books, children's books that talk about making friends and so on and so forth, and read those to them as well. I did that with Brandon.
Might there be any benefit or encouragement of playing a musical instrument if the adult decides to take up an instrument at the same time? I mean, a parent?
Excellent question. Yes. Actually, that's exactly what my husband and I did. Both of us have a background. We both played the piano growing up, and so when our kids started playing, we also took lessons because there is a period of time where your kids will start whining and complaining about quitting because they don't like to practice. So we took the lessons and we said, look, we're practicing, you're practicing. The rule of the house is nobody quits. It is an excellent thing to do, excellent. It really, when the kids see that the parents are in the trenches with them, it motivates them to continue practicing. And also, it's a great family activity.
A lot of parents have asked, do you have any strategies or tips on how to keep my son practicing an instrument? Any, because a lot of them have said, yeah.
A lot of them said what?
No, a lot of them said they were good for the first month or so, and then they lost interest. And they sort of chalked it up to their ADHD. But I think across the board, it's tough to make a child practice. Anything work for you that you would want to share?
Yes. The first thing I did, and actually I did interview mothers. I have a musical background, so I know that practicing is hard. It was hard for me when I was little. So I actually sat with my kids while they were practicing so that I could help them. Now, I talked and interviewed mothers who had no musical training at all. They did the same thing. They said their child just liked a warm body next to them. Is it a sacrifice and is it a pain in the neck? Yes, there definitely were days that it was. However, my focus on doing music, there was a lot of reasons. I knew it was going to build a bigger, better brain, but I also knew that they were going to learn values associated with learning that instrument, such as dependability, responsibility, and so on and so forth. It was that important to me that I said, okay, I'm sitting with them. Now, eventually, the music became its own reward. But in the beginning, it is hard, and you're right. The first month, it's new, it's novel. Yes, they want to, but then they realize this isn't as easy as we thought it was. So then they're going to need encouragement. They are going to need help. And look at it this way. If your child came home from school and said, I don't like school anymore, you're not going to say, oh, well, you don't have to go anymore. You will still make them go to school. And the thing is, if they said, well, this homework is too hard, you're still going to make them get through the homework. You're going to help them. You're going to assist them. You're going to be there for them. And the same thing is when learning to practice. You have to assist them. You have to be there for them. If nothing else, you're a warm body. Now, eventually, as in school, the music becomes its own reward. They start doing better. They start feeling confident in their abilities. But it's not an easy thing, and it teaches them in life it's not easy. But we can do it. We can get over it. It teaches them perseverance and determination.
How many times per week is it necessary for a child to practice in order to reap the benefits? Is there a minimum or a minimum, basically?
Well, if you use the Suzuki method, he jokingly said you only have to practice on the days you eat. We pretty much had our kids practice every day, but it was not a long time. We did some little hand exercises first, just on the kitchen table, and then we went to the keyboard. So I would say it was no more than a half an hour each day. Obviously, as they got into more difficult music, as they were teenagers, they were practicing more than that. But I have to say this, I was not raising my kids to be virtuosos. That wasn't my goal. But it pretty much, I would say, if they're practicing, you want them to practice every day. I mean, they're doing their homework every day, right? So you want them to get into a routine. This is a routine. This is something we do every day.
Alina asks, is it too late to start my child who has ADHD at 14 years of age and still reap the benefits? Or should I have started? Oh, okay.
Absolutely. No. They say that there are those windows of opportunity. Okay, that's great, fine, wonderful. However, it is never too late. There's a book out by John Holt, and it's called It's Never Too Late. He started at the age of 50. He took up the cello, which is not an easy instrument. And he eventually, after a couple of years, he joined a chamber orchestra. Okay, that's at the age of 50. All right, so at the age of 14, absolutely. And I would find an instrument that he or she enjoys, and I would definitely get them started in playing that. And the other thing is, I would probably do an instrument where the child could play in the band or the orchestra at school, because that association with other team people, other peers, will keep the child in playing the music. And yes, it is definitely going to benefit her. I think it's a she, right?
Yes.
It's a daughter. Okay. So yes, it will, and definitely continue having her listen to the classical music while she's studying, but absolutely. If they were 16, if they were 18, I would still get them involved playing a musical instrument.
Mm-hmm. Is there a benefit to memorizing pieces of music? One parent says, I understand practicing to mastery, but what about practicing for the purpose of memorization? Are there other benefits that accrue as a result of that?
That's a good question, too. I always, when I was growing up, when I was playing pieces for recitals, I had to always have them memorized. With my kids, some teachers had them memorized and some did not. I think memory is becoming a lost art. I don't think there's anything wrong with committing something to memory. Oftentimes, because of that whole exercise of committing something to memory, it's never lost. You'll always have that. So no matter where they sit down at that piano to play something, they'll have that piece of music. So in terms of brain-building activities, I can't help but, I can't bring up a particular study right this second, but I can't help but think that, yes, there are certainly brain-building benefits to memorize a piece of music, but I don't think it's necessary to memorize every piece of music that you play.
Right. Will music therapy also help with adult ADHD?
Yes. My husband's ADD, and yes, it definitely helps. Now, there's a difference between music therapy and playing a music instrument. Music therapy is a whole another category. But music definitely helps my husband stay on task. And I'm a pretty structured, organized person, so I run a pretty structured house, and that helps him. But definitely the music helps him. And we definitely play classical music. Not all day long either. That would kind of drive you nuts too. But yeah, different times throughout the day. We have it playing in the morning. And yes, it helps. And he would say it helps too. And he started with the piano as well and then went into other instruments. And he was in the band and he played the trumpet and so forth.
Have you heard of several questions about Focus at Will, a software app that plays specific music to help ADDers focus? Do you know about Focus at Will?
I haven't heard that, but it would be really interesting to look into. I'd like to know what kind of music they are playing for the child. The one thing that I have noticed, too, with parents, and I've told them when you're playing this music for them when they're doing their homework, you need to really watch the child, because in the beginning it will seem as though even that music is distracting to them. So be playing it. That's why I said, like when my kids came home, we changed clothes and had a snack and had them run around. And, I pretty much watched them because, especially Brandon, because I wanted to see, okay, when is this music becoming background music for him and not becoming music that's bothering him? And you'll be able to see that. And it will, because I don't know about this app that you're talking about, but it does sound interesting.
There's a parent who's talking about her 11-year-old son learning the guitar, and she's asking, should we change to one of those instruments you mentioned, the optimal instruments, the percussion or the woodwinds and the stringed instruments, or is because he's obviously enjoying it, and she's saying, in other words, does enjoyment will keep the child coming back and practicing versus just switching him? Yeah.
Absolutely. Do not switch him. The guitar is a very social instrument. Kids get a lot of different friends. One of my sons, he switched from the piano to the guitar. I'm glad that she is getting guitar lessons, because oftentimes parents say, oh, they can just pick up the guitar from their friend or whatever. No, you want them to have the lessons. And absolutely, if he loves the guitar, keep him. It's a fretted instrument, so actually that even builds the auditory cortex even stronger. So that's going to definitely translate into other areas of learning to help him. So no, keep him playing the guitar. Fabulous choice.
And specifically, are there some tunes that you know of already pre-recorded that could be sort of downloaded from the internet that would help with math facts? A lot of parents have asked about help with math facts. Okay.
I would suggest Okay, there's a CD out called Sing a Song of Science. She's using science. I'm trying to think math facts. Rhyming and rapping, that's what it's called. Rhyming and rapping. Try that one, but also, I know for some parents this might sound not so good, but ask your kids, they'll know. Different rap songs, just eliminate the lyrics. If they like a particular rap song that they can really kind of get into the beat of it, that's what you want. So then you can take, and I did this with Brandon. I would go into the teacher on Monday. I would get most of his homework, and I just took all of his lessons and I just made up different things. I would take, pieces of music that had a really strong rhythm to it. It wasn't necessarily classical music. Anything with a strong rhythm that you can just plug those 2 plus 2 is 4 and 4 plus 4 is 8. Anything that has a strong rhythm, that's what you want. That you can plug into it. The rhyming and rapping, I don't know if that is still available, but it was available when Brandon was younger.
There's a parent who's asking, is there any music that you can recommend to help him to sharpen his writing and spelling?
Okay, again, first of all, the more you read to a child, the better their writing becomes. Reading and writing go hand in hand. Again, what I would do is I would have them listen to those pieces of music that I mentioned about from Lozanoff, the water music, the Brandenburg Concertos, and I would definitely read to them every single day, and I would read a minimum of 10 books. I read a minimum of 10 books to Brandon because I knew that there was a correlation between strong writers, strong readers, if the parent is reading to them every day. So that's important. But I always had the music playing while they did the homework. Writing is a skill. It takes time. But the more they read and the more you get them to read, then they, I don't want to use the word by osmosis, but as they're reading, they come to take in writing, how different people, writing styles. All right, so there is definitely a correlation between strong readers and strong writers. So I would play that music, and what I did too with Brandon is in the beginning stages, I don't know how old the child is that we're talking about, but in the beginning stages, I did take his stuff and I did edit it. And we did go through sentences and we did say, okay, how can we structure this better? But during the whole entire time that he was studying and my other kids were studying, we were listening to that music. It definitely changes the electromagnetic frequency of the brain. Now, I also asked a friend of mine who's she's ultra-organized, ultra-focused. I said to her, will you try this? I want to see if this will help somebody in your category. She went into it thinking, oh, this is not going to do anything, and she came back and could not believe how it helped her as well. So there is definitely something to this. So that's what I would do. I'd have this music playing when he's doing his reading, when he's doing his writing, when he's doing his homework. I would do editing, but I would also read to him. We were reading to our kids when they went off to college. I mean, I took books with me to the hospital. I took music with me to the hospital. When they were born, I was reading to them, playing music. And they're all strong writers and readers.
This is a very practical question by a teacher. She says, how do I know when the students, they all listen to music during quiet work time. How do I know when the students are using music as an avoidance of classwork, and how can I know when the music is actually helping them focus? I'm not sure there's an answer to that.
Are they using their own music to listen to? Are they plugging it into their earplugs?
Yes.
Oh, wow. She's an awfully nice teacher.
Tough to figure out, right?
Yeah, I don't know that I would do that because you don't know. I have a concern about those earbuds. I'm just concerned about how loud it is and how that can affect hearing later on. I would control that. I would definitely say, okay, this is the music that we are now listening to while you are at your desks studying. You had that privilege. I would probably not take it away completely. I would probably say, okay, once a week on Friday, that's the free day. That's the day you can use any kind of music you want to study with. But Monday through Thursday, we're listening to my music, and here's my music. And then I would play what I suggested. Yeah, I would not have them play their own music because goodness knows what they're playing and what it's doing to their brain.
Right. Jennifer wants to know, how is this music therapy similar and different from listening therapy that our occupational therapist uses with my son for sensory integration disorder? Are there other listening, therapies out there that are similar to the music therapy? Or
Okay, on an occupational therapist, that's what Aline, that I was talking about Aline, if they're listening to music and they're using the headphones, they're probably doing either the ILS program or the Tomatis program, which are both very similar. That is the acoustically filtered classical music. Most of it is Mozart, some of it is Gregorian chants. When I purchased that program, because my son lives in the Midwest, and anyway, long story short, my husband and I actually went through the program. I was very curious about it. We went through the program ourselves before I sent it to her. And okay, that is what they're doing, is they're listening to classical music. So the music that you would play at home, and there's gating, so it takes, if she's working with an occupational therapist, it's going from low to high frequencies. It's filtered music. It's very, very powerful. It's going to lay this incredible foundation for her audio and visual and motor systems. When you're coming home and you're listening to just the music that I suggested, that's a totally different thing. You don't have the earphones on. You're not listening to filtered music, classical music, nor are you having the gating. So what she is getting through the occupational therapist is extremely powerful, extremely powerful. So that will help her in a different way than having her listen to the music, doing her homework and so forth, or playing. Actually, I would definitely, I don't know the age of this child, but I would get her involved in group music lessons and private music lessons, depending on the age.
A lot of parents have asked about calming down their kids with music. And Sharon specifically asks what music would be the most calming for a child who is academically gifted yet has a ADHD and ODD. A lot of parents have asked about what's the best music, for instance, to help with anger issues, but also with falling asleep. Is that something that you address at all?
Okay, Brandon had the issues with falling asleep. There were a couple of things that I did. There's a series out there called Classical Kids. There was that series, and there was also Introduction to the Classics. I talk about both of these. So when he was first going to sleep, I would have that Introduction to the Classics. Oftentimes the reasons I can't get to sleep are numerous. Okay, so you want to transfer the energy over to something different. So the energy went to that CD, and it talked about the composers and their music. But on days that he really had a tough time, there was a CD out, and I don't think it's available anymore, and it's called Pachelbel's Canon in D with ocean sounds. And it was, everyone's familiar with Pachelbel's Canon in D, but with the ocean sounds, it was very, very soothing for him, and it really helped with sleep issues. Another thing, and this is totally off of music, however, a friend of mine who actually has her PhD, she said try having him put his feet in hot water so that you're taking the energy from the brain and putting it into the feet. It will help him to relax, and to put some Epsom salts in it. Obviously not super hot water, but hot water enough so that and so I had the music playing, soothing music. Like the Pachelbel's Canon in D was really nice, and there's all kinds of meditative classical music out there that's very, very soothing as well. And again, I hate to keep referring to my resource section, but there is a lot of different music that I talk about in different categories. However, I would kind of get them to calm down before they hit the pillow. And I would try that. Okay. Now, the other thing is, believe it or not, the music that I told you about that was tested by Lozana, even though it is lively, it's very calming. Once your brain hits that mode, the body does become relaxed. Even though the brain remains active and able to focus, the body is relaxed. It also is the mode that right before we go to sleep at night, sometimes you get your very best ideas because your brain has gone into that mode. That's why they tell you keep a piece of paper on your nightstand so you can jot down some of these incredible ideas that come to you. Sometimes that's when people actually solve their problems as well. So the music that I did suggest, it can still be a very, very powerful way for calming them down, even though it seems lively.
Stephanie asked, does a child as he grows into a teen and an adult have to do it forever in order to reap the benefits? I mean, that's a broad question. You were talking about the developing brain and how music is optimal for that.
Yes, it's pretty, yes, you do. It's like exercise. It's like going to the gym. You know, it'd be great if we could stop midway through and not go back again or not have to do all this exercise. But yes, you have to continue it throughout your life if you want to get the brain benefits of it. I do believe that it definitely builds a bigger, better brain, and you're going to get residual effects of it the rest of your life. But if you want to continue keeping your brain sharp, keeping it on tact, keeping it focused, keeping it at its highest peak of performance, I still think it's a good idea to listen to classical music every day. I practice in the morning just to keep my brain cells working at least 15 minutes.
Wow.
So, and it's just to get, you know, everything on target for the day. And 15 minutes isn't that long.
Right. Anxiety frequently comes with ADHD, and one parent wants to know if there has been any specific research into the effectiveness of music for treating anxiety, or managing it, I should say, and whether music genres beyond classical have been studied, or is it just classical having the benefit?
Well, in terms of anxiety, yes. When I was talking about that one slide that had all of those different studies up there, and I actually go into them in more detail. One of them did talk about anxiety, and I'm pretty sure the one that was recently studied at the, where was it, at the Vermont Medical
University
School.
of Vermont, yeah.
Yes, I think that one, definitely they were talking about anxiety on that one. Yes, anxiety management and emotional control. That was one thing that they did study, and that studying a musical instrument absolutely helped that. That is a really interesting study, and that one was done by Dr. James Hudziak, H-U-D-Z-I-A-K. If you Google that name, the study will come up, and you can read it in more detail. But they specifically said anxiety management. It was really interesting watching Brandon, because Brandon had anxiety. I think many adults have anxiety, and if you play the music, if you're playing a musical instrument, there is something, I don't want to use the word magical, but there is something magical when that child is playing a musical instrument, how they calm down. And when they're playing a musical instrument, they don't necessarily have to play classical music. They just playing and learning the musical instrument, and whatever music they're learning, it's the whole process. Now, listening is another thing, but when they're learning to play an instrument, it doesn't have to be classical. So if that study talks about learning the musical instrument, and I know that they went into the scales, learning the Hanon scales, how it helps with all of those different things, but I would definitely get them involved in playing a musical instrument.
What if the choice of instrument is the drums, and you live in a small apartment? Do you talk your child, even though he's gravitated toward them, the drums?
If they want to do it, I'd get earplugs for the parents, and okay, you can get the whole drum set, but they also have, what did we get for one of our kids? It was just the drum pad, I think it's called, and that's how he practiced, was on the drum pad, so he didn't go all completely insane. But I think it's great because, all right, when they get into middle school and high school, it's a really popular thing, the kid who plays the drums. So by all means, if they want to, now it's different from reading music. What they're doing is they're reading rhythms. So I would still, if they're playing the drums, I'd say great, fine, wonderful, but I want you to learn also how to play, read music.
Mm-hmm.
So I would probably have them learning the piano as well.
Uh-huh.
But, you know, learning the drums, they're great. They're fun. My one son who played the drums, he ended up in drumline and had a great time with it. It was a really great high school experience as a result of that.
Mm-hmm.
So, yes, by all means, do it.
Okay. Well, Sharlene, I think we're going to have to end it there. It's about 2 o'clock. So I want to thank you for all of your insights and takeaways. Really, it was an eye-opener for me.
Well, thank you.
And I think probably the rest of the participants. So I appreciate everything you provided, and maybe we can get you back another time to talk about other issues on music, because there are a lot of questions we never got to. So
okay.
Otherwise,
thank you. I appreciate it, and thank you very much. And if you know, I did give my email address. I'm happy to answer questions via email as well.
Good, because a lot of people have asked about, they didn't get the spellings of certain things you mentioned, CDs, songs, etc., musical approaches. So
okay.
Maybe they can get that from you.
Absolutely. Email me, and
great.
I will. I'm good about responding to email quickly, so I'm more than happy to provide any spelling.
Okay.
Thank
well, that
you.
ends today's webinar, and we'll see you next week. Everyone, have a good day.
Thank you.